This podcast is intended to be education and commentary. It will discuss adult themes and may use coarse language. Pantheon Podcasts presents Rock and Roll Archaeology with host Christian Swain. Music, culture, technology, and rock and roll. And now, on with the show.
Hey, my diggers of rock and roll archaeology. Welcome to our new deeper digs in rock revival. Now going to be rebranded as RNRA Digs Deeper. So you'll hear that from now on. These will be the field notes from the first rock and roll archaeologist. That's me. A few months ago, we brought you an older interview that I did with Robert Hilburn, and it focused on his 2018 book about Paul Simon. That was our first test back, and guess what? You all responded with enthusiasm, so we will march on. And thank you very much for the encouragement. I really appreciate it. Plus, as you may have seen and heard, we're trying to tie up all the rock and roll archaeologists' various activities into a single feed and website. If you're listening right now, you have the feed, but please share with anyone who wants to become a rock and roll archaeologist as well. I am not the only one. If you're a fan of this show, well, then you're one too. Okay, here is the quick business and how to do some of that sharing. rockandrollarchaeology.com is HQ. All our socials can be found there, as well as a web player for the episodes of The Big Show, the shorts, and now these interviews. We just added a new swag partner called Fourth Wall. Again, you can find it on the website under the support tab. The new swag partner has some seriously amazing pieces of higher quality shirts, mugs, stickers, etc. than we've ever been able to produce to date. In fact, I am right now staring at this sweet Digger's hoodie that I bet you are just going to want on your next excavation. So go get it. Okay, we love our partners at rocksbackpages.com. It's a big resource for our own research, and therefore every digger should know where to go to add to your own field notes. And by the way, listen to their podcast on the Pantheon Podcast Network, just like us. Finally, if you really love what we do here and want to be an official digger, please consider sending us a buck or two monthly using our Patreon. Again, all can be found at the rockandrollarchaeology.com website. Got it? Good.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, or the times they are a-changing.
Our guest today is a man who isn't just a historian of rock and roll, but someone who had a front row seat and often a backstage pass to one of the most significant cultural movements of the 20th century. Most of you know him as the longtime publicist for the Grateful Dead and the author of the definitive biography of the band, A Long Strange Trip. Of course, I am talking about my friend, Dennis McNally. Dennis is back with a new book, and it's a monumental piece of work. It's called The Last Great Dream, the 60s and the San Francisco Counterculture. And I want to set this up for you because this book is so much more than just music history. Dennis has essentially written the definitive story of the dream itself, that explosive, chaotic, and beautiful utopian experiment that erupted in San Francisco in the 1960s. He argues that this wasn't just about hippies with flowers in their hair. It was a serious, if sometimes naive, attempt to forge a new American reality. And of course, we agree. He weaves together 3 core pillars of that movement. Okay, the politics, the civil rights, and the anti-war protests that gave the movement its moral fire. The psychedelics, the consciousness-expanding exploration led by figures like Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. The music, the rock and roll that served as the soundtrack, the glue, and the gospel, with the Grateful Dead right at the epicenter of it all. Now, what makes The Last Great Dream so essential is Dennis's perspective. He doesn't just write about the Haight-Ashbury, the Diggers, Janis Joplin, or the Hells Angels. He understands how all these disparate threads connected to form this incredible, fleeting tapestry. He chronicles both the ecstatic peak of the human being and the inevitable fractures that followed. This book is the story of how a generation tried to build a new world based on community, art, and freedom, and what we can learn from both their incredible successes and their heartbreaking failures. It's the why behind the what. Maybe we need that spirit back today. All right. So, get ready for a thorough excavation. We're going to talk about the birth of a scene, the legacy of a dream, and what it all means today. Oh, a little production note here. I forgot to do the pleasantries in recording. Of course, we had chatted before the red light went on, so I just dive right in. Okay, let's do this. The man who chronicled the dead, who lived inside the movement, and has now written its most vital history. Diggers, my friend, Dennis McNally.
Sometimes the light's all shining on me. Other times I can barely see. Lately it occurs to me. What a long, strange trip it's been.
The Last Great Dream, this isn't just another look back at the 1960s. It's a profound exploration of the era's potent ideals. Its dazzling achievements, its inherent contradictions, and its lasting, often complex legacy on American culture and consciousness. Dennis, I must say, this is a profoundly deep and academic work. In fact, it strikes me as so rich with insight that one could easily imagine it inspiring a multitude of master's theses or even doctoral dissertations, particularly for students of sociology. What do you think of that?
Well, what I have said, and I wouldn't wish my book on any poor struggling doctoral student. But what I have said is simply that kind of every chapter could spin into a book, because they're each this, there was just so much going on. To put it mildly.
Yeah, it's a Herculean effort to even just categorize the whole thing and put it into chapters so there's a narrative to it.
That's why it takes me 10 years to write a book.
Right. So, The Last Great Dream is more than nostalgia. It's a reckoning, and it's very timely. What prompted you to undertake this deeper, more ambitious exploration of the 1960s dream at this particular time?
Well, events have happened since I started it that make it even more timely, because we now have what you have to, among other things, understand is that the current administration basically derives straight from Ronald Reagan. Yeah. Ronald Reagan was elected against hippies, the free speech movement, and the Watts Rebellion as governor in California.
66, sorry.
And
yeah.
then president. So, there's a direct opposition, frankly. So I did a book about Kerouac, which is the 50s, and I did a book about the Grateful Dead in the 60s, and then I did a book called On Highway 61, which was like the deeper background, and where what influenced white youth to not go for the mainstream.
Yeah, not to be the corporate man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That there were, examples of that going back into the 1890s. So, and then I stopped, and I wasn't, at the moment I wasn't sure where I was going. And in 2016, the lady Anthea Hartig, who was the boss of California Historical Society. She's now at the Smithsonian, so you can tell she's
moving up in the world.
She's very, very, very sharp.
Hopefully, she
very
can keep
nice
her
person.
job.
Yes, and I hate to think about that. She invited me to, because this was now a year before the Summer of Love, 50th anniversary, and all the institutions in the Bay Area were, wow, it's a big deal. Let's do something about it. So I said, sure. Which was amusing because, my previous two books, my wife, who's a superior photographer,
Susanna Millman.
Susanna
yes.
Millman, and I said, Susanna, you do the pictures. But what it boiled down to is it became a treasure hunt. You think of every picture tells a story. Write that down, I started thinking about what's the story. And the thing, and I say it now, if you were to ask me what surprised you most about all this research, was the fact that nobody had done it. That every book about the Summer of Love, the hippies, the whatever, however you want to call it, starts almost all in 1965 with the charlatans in Silver City at the Red Dog Saloon, where they combined LSD, dancing, a light show, and rock and roll, and yes,
the first of the acid tests.
In a sense, and they didn't just pop out of the air. Where do these folks come from? Where do their ideas come from? So I started, and after about a month of working on the photo show, I said, "Wait a minute, this is a book. You bozo." Took me long enough. And I started researching. And, it's very interesting because one of the hard things about this topic was defining beginning, middle, and end. I mean, I'm a storyteller, okay? I'm not a theorist, and I'm not I have an academic background, but I don't follow any academic, some academic rules. But anyway, I started poking, and the driving element of what led to the summer to hippie. There were a couple of elements. One was kind of a very soft, not bomb throwing, but a soft anarchism, an anarchism that objected to conventionality on all kinds of levels. And the mentor for that in San Francisco was a guy named Kenneth Rexroth. Who was not a great poet, but a poet and a great teacher, and an advocate for, as I say, for libertarian pacifism,
right,
and that sort of thing. And his partner in this, very quickly, was a guy named Robert Duncan, who came from a very mystical, occult-oriented family over there in Alameda. Would you believe it? And Duncan brought, as I say, the mysticism. And the two of them, sort of kicked off what was going to be a very booming and thriving poetic scene long before Allen Ginsberg got there to read Howl.
Right.
Howell's important.
Yep.
But, one shouldn't forget what preceded him. And that's, one of the critics once wrote that sort of chided everybody about, Howl, because it was really about a bunch of people in New York. And the connection to San Francisco was like, well, but it was really written about people in New York. And I went, yeah, but you're missing the point. He couldn't write it. He knew those people in New York, but he couldn't write it until he came to San Francisco and experienced San Francisco and the audience at the Sixth Gallery, which, thought that, the heavens had moved that night. So So I started poking around, and then the first people that were influenced by this message, other than poets, and you have to remember, if you decide that you're going to be a poet, that you are a poet, and you're not teaching in college, that you're not an academic poet, that you're absolutely willing to stay outside that zone, you're already displacing yourself from conventional society.
Oh, of course.
I mean, for starters, how are you going to make a you're not
sleeping
going
on
to
a
make a
dirt
living
floor,
on your
right.
poetry, most likely. So there's that. But what happened was, in particular, the students at the San Francisco what was then the California School of Fine Arts, but which I will invariably refer to as the Art Institute because it became that. Actually, not till '61, really. But anyway, and it's a very essential part of this story. And these students were a fascinating group. Almost all of them were veterans. And they were people
Working off the GI Bill.
Not everybody bought a house or whatever with a GI Bill. Some of them went to art school, and these are people that had spent 5 years, under fire or working in the factory or whatever. But suddenly, they had a chance to do what they wanted to do, and they were great students. They were just engaged as all hell. And the guy who was running it, a guy named McNally, literally, he kept the studios open all night so that people could paint when they wanted to, and that was the kind of encouragement that they needed. And a number of them picked up on the basic bohemian ideology, if that's the word. Clifford Still who was the great abstract expressionist who taught at what was then CSFA. Did the same thing. He was very formal, but in fact, he was a total purist about art. That it was about expression and not necessarily about satisfying the client or anything else. He was a real purist. So and here's the classic example. And in some ways, the entirety of the book is wrapped into this one story. One of those students was a guy named Wally Hedrick. And Wally became very well known as a master of assemblage metal sculpture, and what was sometimes called funk art. And he was, he was a pretty big deal. And I
believe Bob Dylan's pursuit today.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And Wally was very consciously a beat, and part of that scene. And this artist, and he also taught weekend art at this institute. Among his students was a kid from the Mission named Jerry Garcia. So Wally is playing Big Bill Brunzi and other blues, acoustic blues, which is why when Jerry Garcia got an accordion for his birthday, he said, no, I want a guitar. Well, after he got the guitar, he was lost.
Yep.
That was it.
Yep.
That was Jerry for the next 50 years, or 40 years. And also, Wally, at one point, Jerry's buddy said, what is this about beat? This is 1958 now.
Yeah.
And they're reading about beat. It's currently on the front page, and On the Road is a bestseller.
Yep.
And Wally said, "You guys are beat. Go look at this book, On the Road." And it became Jerry's Bible.
Yeah.
And it was those values that
I believe that's how you got involved with Jerry Garcia. It was
totally how I got involved.
I
wrote a biography of Kerouac, and he liked it. Eventually, I met him. And so casually, because I really wanted to do a book about the Grateful Dead, but I had no idea. I was sure that if I marched up to them and said, I want to do a book about you, they'd say, sure, take a number. So instead, I got a long story, and you don't need to hear it. And,
we've talked about this before. The last time I interviewed you, it was you got roped in to be their PR guy, then you couldn't really get to the book until after Jerry passed, and then all of a sudden that
was true later. But at any rate, so I met Jerry and mentioned very casually, the Kerouac book, and he was very pleased because, as I say, I think I did a good job, but he loved the book because he loved Kerouac.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
On the road, and did to the day he died. So, Shazam! I started working on the Grateful Dead book.
Well, let me bring it back to something you said about Ginsberg needing to come to San Francisco before Howl could, be written and performed. We, with Rock and Roll Archaeology, our episode 16, East of Eden, we kind of focus on Berkeley professor of geography, cultural geography, Carl Sauer. Are you familiar with his work at all? So he has this idea that, culture is developed by location, and how it works. And the interesting thing about San Francisco were these little valleys that exist that each had its own unique flavor. We seem to have lost that over the last 20 years. But prior to that, and especially when I first came to the town and moved here in the 90s, it still existed. Do you think that had something to do with that as well?
Oh, absolutely. San Francisco, well, there's a number of things that make San Francisco unique. One is that the access to nature is unique, and it looks west to Asia rather than back to the United States. It's Duncan wrote that it was on the western edge of things. Literally, you've got a society or a civilization, the Western civilization, that starts in Italy and Greece and whatnot, and starts marching
westward. Yeah, there's nowhere to go after California.
And you get to the Land's End, and
hence the Eastern thought that migrated into
that was
California.
Absolutely one of the fundamental elements. But the other important thing about San Francisco is that cities arise out of business, commerce. Usually sober bourgeois or even rapacious bourgeois businessmen, mostly men, who are out to make money, and they make the rules. San Francisco was created by a bunch of whack jobs. I'm trying to be cute, but the fact is that there were people who didn't fit in where they were, which was mostly the East Coast of the United States, or Chile, or
the land of misfit toys,
China.
Yeah.
And these were people who were gambling. They weren't bourgeois. They were gambling that they might make might make money. So they came here, and there weren't so many rules. The classic example of that is one of those guys was a guy named Norton, who lost all his money and kind of slipped a few gears and went wacko, and decided that he was Emperor Norton, and he started printing his own money.
What year was this?
1860s.
Okay.
70s, right? Early.
Mm-hmm.
And every city has crazy people. That's not.
Sometimes we make them mayors or presidents.
Sometimes,
or what have you. Yes.
And but in his case, he printed money, and the bartenders and the restaurateurs of San Francisco accepted it. They took they fed him because he was part of their community.
Yeah.
And that's sort of an example of, prostitution was effectively legal during Prohibition.
Oh yeah, I think the entire city just negated the idea of Prohibition here.
And literally this board of supervisors instructed the police department not to enforce Prohibition. So it was always a place apart, and so it was a logical place. Allen Ginsberg came to San Francisco specifically because Neal Cassady, his friend, was living in the city at that time. Actually, he was living in San Jose. Eventually, he got to the city, or had been already. That's right. And at any rate, there was a certain relaxation in general for him, and then eventually. He still had a girlfriend at that point, and he was sitting in her apartment, which was on Nob Hill, and which looked down on the Sir Francis Drake Hotel. And if you look at a picture to this day, up near the top of the hotel, there are these two, I think they're sealed, I don't think they're actually functioning, windows that look like kind of look like eyes if you do as Alan did and take peyote, and it's a misty, foggy night.
It really
swirling
shows
around.
up.
And he went, it looks like Moloch. Moloch was the eater of souls in Hebrew mythology.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, he filed that notion. And some months later, he sat down at a typewriter and he started writing a poem about Moloch. And fairly soon it became Howl.
Wow. All right, let's dive into the exploration of the intellectual, spiritual, artistic currents that fed the dream. Could you highlight a few of these currents that you feel are particularly crucial or perhaps underappreciated?
Well, abstract expressionism broke the mold of the way people saw things and opened up people to a more personal experience. And the same was true of
So like Jason Pollock and folks like that.
Jackson Pollock.
Jackson.
Yeah, and Clifford Still, who was there. But in fact, one of the people, there's a marvelous, and I've just gone blank on her name. Dang. The woman who ran the San Francisco Museum of Art. Oh, it's in the book, obviously, but anyway, she was having art shows, some of the first museum shows that any of these guys in New York. I mean, this is all, the main people were coming out of New York, as in Pollock. And she gave him his first museum show in San Francisco.
Because they weren't getting recognized
they weren't,
by
the
East
were
Coast
still,
intelligentsia.
Exactly. Yeah. And it took them away. It took well into the 50s in both places for that to happen. So that's one of the things that's happening. There's of course avant-garde poetry and literature, and Allen and company, and eventually on the road and in literature, and there's just a sense of exploration and of finding your own way that.
That seems like a very American ideal. Finding your own way.
Absolutely. Ultimately it's about individualism.
Right.
Except there's an individualism, as I say, that can lead you to just be selfish and make tons of money.
Yeah.
Or there's an individualism that says, you look for what is out there that's of value and you share it.
Community.
And it's about community, exactly. And then a third obvious element that's very unique in San Francisco, particularly at the time. I might add that one of the classic defenders of individualism that was uniquely San Francisco was KPFA, which brought, among other things, Pauline Kael, Rex Roth, and Alan Watt to the public.
I was surprised to find Pauline Kael actually started here in San Francisco and not, the famous New York Times film critic.
No, she an interesting story. She had a child with a very gay poet by the name of James Broughton, and left him and eventually hooked up with I think she married a guy who owned a movie theater in Berkeley, and she started writing notes for him, and then she started doing it on the radio, and then she was Pauline Kael.
Yeah? Wow.
Yeah, she's an interesting story.
Talk about pursuing your passion.
She and exactly
and turning that into
that was possible
a career
at that time.
Yeah.
But the other thing, as I mentioned, Watts, Zen, and just generally Asian study. The respect for Asia. Mm-hmm. The idea that Chinatown wasn't some
labor camp.
Either a labor camp or an amusement park. Mm. And it's very interesting because what happened was after the earthquake in 1907, Chinatown is in some of the choicest real estate in San Francisco.
It really is, isn't it?
And they were the supervisors were going to move it to Hunters Point.
Mm-hmm. Oof.
And a couple of the Chinese, figures in Chinatown said no. And what they did was they created the visuals with all the pagodas and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that, in fact, it became so popular that they couldn't move it.
For not just for the locals, but the tourists
tourism.
To come, and it provided another excuse for people to come and visit San Francisco, which was good for everybody.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
and very quickly the supervisors were smart enough to say, maybe not.
Yeah. So the book isn't really a simple rose-tinted retread. What aspects of the 1960 counterculture do you feel were most important to re-examine with a more critical and nuanced lens like you've done?
Well, one of the essential tenets of hippie philosophy was non-interference with other people. Now, this could result when...
So a live and let live.
Live and let live, which is nice. On the other hand, when your friend is going bananas and perhaps drowning in drugs, you have something of an obligation to say, hey, you're losing it.
Yeah.
But there was a strong pressure against doing that. Mm-hmm. Oh man, don't bum his trip.
Yeah, let him do his thing.
It's his trip.
Yeah.
And there's part of me that says yes, well, that's true, and there's another part of me that says,
But where does that lead us, right?
And where does it lead? And before a deadhead out there says, yeah, and why didn't you get Jerry to stop doing drugs? Let me answer that in two ways. One is I point out that he did not die from drugs.
No,
drugs kept him going.
Yeah.
He died from a heart attack. But more to the point, many people spoke to him. And the fact is, and we all know it, that unless a person wants to change their life, it's going to be tough. Yeah. And I might also point out that he was in rehab.
Right.
Really working at it.
That moment.
And promising, talking to friends before he went in, saying, I really want to, this time, I got to deal with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
It goes to the 1967, the Summer of Love is always thought of as like this wonderful moment in time. But actually, that was already where the dream had started to die.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you say? And to your point, because, kids from all over the country were filtering in and nobody was telling them much what to do, save for maybe like the Diggers who kind of tried to keep, the scene with some sort of positivity as opposed to devolving into, a den of hard drugs, which is what it became.
When I got asked to curate that photo show, I said, by the way, I want to tell you that the Summer of Love was not the summer of 1967. Mm-hmm. The Summer of Love was the fall of 1966, which, in fact, as we all know, we San Franciscans know, is the better weather
yes,
and
true.
the more summer-like weather. But beside that, what was going on in the Hay was simply completely under the radar, and nobody bothered with them, and people were free to experiment with sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever, in a fairly relaxed and tranquil way. It was so much fun and did so well that they decided to throw a party to celebrate, and it was called the Be-In.
Yes.
On January 14th, 1967. And 50,000, I'm guessing, nobody really knows, 50,000 people showed up, blowing their cover, and suddenly the media descended.
Paid attention, right?
And when the media descended, every kid, the media and White Rabbit.
Yeah, Life magazine, I think, put a copy out that was about that. And like that Life magazine was like on every coffee table in America. And those kids were like, open that, and for once in their life, Life magazine was speaking directly to them. Come here.
I have a vivid actual memory of opening that in the public library of my little tank town in Maine. And seeing a picture, in particular, the picture of Jerry with the Uncle Sam hat, which he wore, I guess, at the Be-In, and I didn't realize how much impact it would have on my life at the time, but I did look at it and go, that looks interesting.
So as we're talking about right here, you're definitely willing to explore the shadows, the naivety, excesses, and co-optation of, in your view, what were the most significant internal or external factors that led to the unraveling or morphing of the original dream?
Well, the most obvious factor was simply, complete environmental overload. There were probably 1,000 people in the Haight per se. The 50,000 that showed up at the Bean, came from all over Northern California. But 1,000 people cannot host 100,000 people, and that's the best guess seems to be that roughly 100,000 people came to San Francisco to see what was going on,
to be a part of this new scene,
this new magic Candyland. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that the 1,000 people that had already come were people in their 20s who had some life experience, maybe a little money, or some sense of how to make it, and in a sensible way, that left time to do what they wanted to do. And many of them were working in the music, were musicians or working for the Fillmore or the Avalon. Mm-hmm. And, they could function. The kids that came had
homes,
very few. A lot of them.
Yeah. There's escaping abuse.
I'm sure many of them. There was an enormous wall at the local police station with pictures of runaway, families. Yeah. Oh, where's my son? Yeah. And it simply it was an untenable situation. It's just really as simple as that. Mm-hmm. At that point, people who wanted to make money selling things like meth or heroin moved in.
Of course.
Because there's a market.
Supply and demand.
And there was a demand for, I want to get high. Well, try this. Yeah. And,
I should have just stuck with cannabis and LSD.
That's correct. Psychedelics. I recently got criticized in the Wall Street Journal because I didn't condemn drug use sufficiently, and the fact remains that out of millions of LSD trips, the proportion that resulted in anything of significant negativity is tiny.
Minuscule.
Tiny. It was...
what do they say? A molehill, making a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah,
now, granted, the harder drugs definitely...
Oh, I'm not a big fan of,
I mean, Oxy, from the Sackler family has done far more damage to the youth of this country than psychedelics ever did.
Was it... I may be quoting you, I swear to God. Somebody just told me this, that the... teacher in medical school said, "What are the three to the students? What are the three most damaging drugs?" And they said, oxy, whatever, and heroin. No, the three are cigarettes,
yep, nicotine,
alcohol,
mm-hmm.
and prescription drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've always said that by the way, I am not the author of that quote, but I'll gladly use that in the future. But I've always said that, the gateway drug is not cannabis. It's nicotine. Really, that's what kids first start engaging in. And, of course, alcohol, to your point, it's accepted by society. So it's everywhere legal. And it's easy to be found. Whereas drugs are certainly were a little bit harder to get to back then until – as we said, there's a giant marketplace that's just sitting there waiting to be exploited.
That's right.
So conversely, while acknowledging its complexities, what do you believe were the most tangible and positive achievements of lasting impact of that dazzling fluorescence of the 1960s dream?
I teach these high school kids who take a class in the 60s. They're fascinated. lecture. I should say I lecture it periodically. And I look them in the eye and I say, the reason you're taking this class, bold of me to tell them what they think, but is that the 60s never went away, that it's essential, that what happened in the 60s is an essential part of your life today. For instance, well, outside of the fact that some of those kids are deadheads, so they're still listening to the music of the 60s, if you do yoga, if you eat organic food, if you have a home computer, one of the
homebrew, yeah.
If you there's a wonderful book, by the way, for those of you who are interested.
Besides your wonderful book,
yeah, well, is a guy named John Markoff, who covered Silicon Valley for the New York Times for many years, and he wrote a book
before
called
Kara Swisher did, yeah.
What the Dormouse Said, which is about LSD and how it affected people in Silicon Valley in the 60s, which ended up with Steve and Steve and the Homebrew Club, which was very, very clearly derived from hippie. One of the people that led it was a
Whole Earth
a
catalog,
pacifist. And that Stuart Brand, and the Whole Earth catalog, all that stuff, and it flows together, and that's why the home computer developed here instead of, say, at MIT, because they didn't do enough acid at MIT.
I'd say also, that, and you can disagree if you would like, but after '67, especially the people who'd been here before and had seen it get wrecked, they all kind of left and went out back to the country, back to the land is the kind of move. Well, what that did was that pushed the message from a localized little environment like Disneyland, and now put it across the country that other people could, associate with and be a part of.
All true. The classic example of that is a guy named Roger Hilliard, who's a friend of mine, actually, and lives in San Francisco now. But he had been part of the North American Ibis Alchemical Light Show, which was the big light show at the Avalon for the first year of the Avalon. And when he got, decided to move on, he ended up in Boston helping to establish Erewhon, Erewhon, which was a major source for organic food, and really started what is now, I think, a $50 billion a year industry. And there were food co-ops. There were all.
You mentioned Alice Waters, Chez Panisse.
Alice Waters,
the entire farm to table movement that she's championed.
And she was talking about how she happened to be in Sproul Plaza in Berkeley in 1964 and heard Savio speak. So what she does is part of the path.
All right, here's my obligatory Grateful Dead question, you being the historian for the band. The Grateful Dead are sort of the living embodiment of many of these ideals, and then they took it on the road and, like I was saying, passed that message out to the masses.
Absolutely.
How did their journey reflect both the triumphs of the inherent contradictions of the larger counterculture experience?
Well, they did a marvelous job of succeeding by breaking every rule. We should start by saying the Grateful Dead was not a rock band. It was a jazz band that happened to use rock instruments and rock songs, but their heart, their soul, was in improvisation.
Yeah.
And when you hear improvisational musicians, you can either say, for people who like 3-minute rock and roll, they're just noodling, or you can say they're exploring, and who knows where they'll go, but I'm along for the ride.
A musical conversation.
Exactly. That's what
that is happening, and that you get to be a part of in real time. And like a mandala, it's a one-off, and once it's gone, off it goes.
There you go.
But I've always taken, if I can, math is the language of the universe, and music is based on math. So therefore, isn't music its voice?
and it is the human product, even more than writing. Speaking as a writer, that touches your heart directly, heart, soul. We're now using terms that are that people go, oh, what do you mean? But in fact, you do know what I mean. That it's a direct, sensual, and intellectual experience, music, and it certainly was both, in San Francisco in the '60s and after. The Grateful Dead. What happened was, of course, this. Frankly, what I would say is that what happened was that, compare it to Jefferson Airplane, who could sing better, who could write better songs at the beginning, but was riven ultimately by ego, by competing egos, and
within the band, and
band, and just
chasing the status and the dollars that go along with that.
And the fact is that the Grateful Dead had a leader who was not a leader,
right,
who refused to formally lead.
Again, there's that double-edged sword. Jerry led by gravitational pull. He led by he was sort of the son people related to, without. You read George Harrison or you read Bill Wyman about being the odd man out in the band in terms of they won't take my songs, blah blah blah. Jerry would pound Weir to write songs because he wanted a more diverse band. Mm-hmm. Jerry's instincts were all inclusive, intuitive, and not about his ego, right?
Which made it work. Now, unfortunately, because he was the larger aura, shall we say, on the stage, he was the guitar player. I mean, that it's rock and roll. Guitars. I once had to break it to a drummer that, look, you're a brilliant musician, but you're the drummer.
Right.
You're keeping a beat. The guitarist is what everybody's here for.
Yeah.
And
that or the lead vocalist, if you have one.
And the lead vocalist, which he was too.
Yeah.
At any rate, the attention fell on him, and eventually that got to him, where particularly when people
started to deify him,
and the deification was he once. He managed to make a joke of it for a long, long time. Somebody said something about, they think you're Jesus. And he said, well, it's okay as long as they don't. If I see them coming toward me with planks and nails,
then we got a problem.
Then we got a major problem. But but eventually, when you're going on the road and you're in New York and you can't go to the museum, which he'd love to do because he loved art.
You'd get swamped.
Because you'd get, the best thing I ever did for the Grateful Dead, among other, maybe one of them anyway, was there was this marvelous traveling Monet exhibit that was at Chicago Art Institute, and I got them an hour alone with it. All they had to do was sign some autographs, and
there you go.
Jerry was just like, yeah.
That's actually sort of more commonplace nowadays with celebrities. Is a place will get rid of all the crowds and allow them access alone because they can't just walk out in public without throngs of people surrounding them and attempting to get some sort of magic out of them.
Yeah, that and deadheads work at museums.
All right, so you illuminate familiar figures from fresh angles. Can you give an example of a well-known personality from that era, not the Grateful Dead, whom you feel that The Last Great Dream offers a new perspective on?
Everybody that does press on their books says, I always get the same old questions. That's a new question. A fresh... Well, one of the people that
there are 250 characters that inhabit this thing.
No, that's what my first reader was saying. There's so many names. I said, it's a history. It's not,
And let us say that there is a glossary.
Yes,
at least a paragraph for each one.
Yeah.
And of course, there's always the internet.
One of the yes, and the names are all available. But one of the people that that I think is very important and does not get his due is a guy named Peter Berg, who was a member of the Diggers and kind of the main intellectual source of Digger ideology, which was primarily simply anti-materialism, the whole concept of free, but also the environment. He was writing about the environment in 1966, and other than
he probably read
Rachel Carson.
Yeah.
Well, he'd read Rachel Carson, but he'd also spent time in the Everglades, and he had a sense of the environment.
So he could see changes and recognize there was something going on that wasn't, let us call it in a geologic time, but more in a human lifespan time.
And just simply that industrialization. Oh, I wish I could recite the quote because it's a great quote, but it's to the effect that there's a cost to the prosperity and industrialization that we all experience from having, electricity, for instance. There is a price for all this, and it's worth thinking about. As I say, he once said, "It's a pain in the ass being 30 years ahead," because he was. He was absolutely.
People just don't get that when you're that far ahead.
One of the first environmental writers after Rachel Carson, and it's important stuff.
So you connect these figures and movements to broader intellectual traditions. What are some of the most surprising or profound connections you uncovered or wanted to emphasize?
Really, it just all connects. You've got these avant-garde artists, painters and writers. You've got an institution like the Tape Music Center, which was this collection, 3 electronic, bleeps and blorps, very strange electronic music, which obviously was never going to be super popular. But what happened was they set up a place near. It was part of the sort of the move from North Beach, which had the rents had gone up and the tourists had come and so forth in the late 50s, early 60s. And they set up on the corner of Page and Divisadero, which of course is right on the edge of the Haight.
Yeah.
And they partnered with KPFA and with the Ann Halpern Dance Group, which was doing similarly revolutionary avant-garde things with dance. And it developed it was, much more than the sum of its parts. It created this cultural fusion that was going on in the early 60s that would end up being transferred into music, improvisational music, and combined with LSD, created what was happening in the Haight. People just sort of dismiss, sex, drugs, rock and roll. It's trivial. No, it's not trivial.
It's always been considered like lowbrow art,
exactly.
and that's completely unfair. In fact, that's a big reason why we created Rock and Archaeology, is to expose that this is a great story of human history. This is a great moment of art that became a global phenomenon in real time. That had never happened before.
Exactly, and it's less. Things come and go. The Haight obviously was only bright and fun for a year or so, year and a half. San Francisco rock and roll has, except for the Grateful Dead and its various offshoots, sort of went away. And God knows, current popular music is, to me, mostly, how do I put it? Not I want to say pre-programmed, but that's not the right way of describing it. It's just limited. I don't think of it as all that exploratory.
Well,
it's
accepted
skill.
accepted conventions are now part of the formula, and to step out of that is not going to cause you to rise above this sea of music that now exists. I mean, back in the day, we had to make choices, and there was a limited number of people that were actually doing it. Maybe, in the first class in the 1950s, there's like 10 or 12 people that are actually making all the music. By the 70s, it's maybe 1,000, and now there's millions.
And
so
that's the
you
thing.
can have whatever you want when you get right down to it. But if you're not looking for the lowest common denominator, like broadcast television used to do to justify its monetary existence, then you're just not going to rise up to the point where the culture is paying attention to you, I think.
People ask me, how do I want an agent. I want to publish my book. And I explain that really the same thing happened both to the recording industry and the book publishing industry, which was digitization means that anyone can write a book. And you can publish, if you can scrape together $1,000, you can self-publish the book. Certainly the same, perhaps even easier
with an
for
album,
music.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What does Pro Tools cost? What does it?
A couple $100 a month. I
Yeah.
mean, a year.
Something like
as
that.
a license. Yeah.
Most.
Yep.
You work hard enough, you can manage that, and if you play, then you set up and you start recording.
Oh, I don't. You don't even need to play anymore. I mean, the playing will all be done for you. In fact, the machinery has gotten to be so good that anybody with an idea can at least put that onto a piece of digital content that can be put out and to see if it resonates with people.
Exactly, and as a writer,
and that's a plus or minus. Again, there's a lot of double-edged swords going on here.
There's a whole bunch, and they all cut. The thing with writing, I try to explain to people is the Bible. The Bible of the writing industry is the New York Times Book Review. Mm-hmm. My best, I am told. I don't know how reliable this is, but I am told that at this point there's 100,000 books a year being published in the United States. My estimate is that the Times Book Review covers perhaps 1,000.
Yeah.
So if you don't already have your audience,
mm-hmm.
And that's of course any editor, like any producer, will say to you, where's your market?
Well, that's what producers look for now.
Yeah.
For music, it's social media followers more than anything else.
There you go.
Hence why A&R people look to TikTok as the way to be all. So it's not about quality or it's not about originality. It's just strictly about commerce.
Yep.
At that point.
That's
all
pretty
right.
much it.
There seems to be a current throughout the book that is a poignant acknowledgement of what was lost or perhaps never fully achieved. What for you is the most significant aspects of the dream that remain unfulfilled, or what was perhaps inherently impossible?
That's why I called it the last great dream, because it was a great dream. That is to say, a dream of an entirely new way of living, of peace, of community, of love. And I know that there are people out there listening just flinched when I said the word love. Oh God, do I have to hear that again? But frankly,
all you need is love.
They were right, and it's still true.
Oh.
And that's all I can say is that it is a great dream. It hasn't happened. Right now, oh God, it's harder to see than ever.
Well, isn't this a backlash to exactly that?
Everything. Well, as I say, this goes back. Reagan was elected governor because of hippies, and the free speech movement in particular, and the Watts Rebellion as a reaction. And there's a straight line. Of among other things, of scaling the economy such that rich people get richer and poor people scuffle, and God knows that's the it's just shameful to cut funding for health in order to cut taxes on the already wealthy
For people who don't need the money.
and it's like. How do you justify that? And if you I don't
morally,
want to hear
morally
about,
you can't. You cannot justify it.
I don't want to hear about supply side economics.
Yeah. You can use all kinds
that's
of
BS.
formula which can be manipulated
Yep.
to prove some sort of data. Again, like we were saying with how history is now sort of what's the word you used? Where they're not looking back and they're coming with
A theory.
and then looking for the evidence to justify that theory. It's the same thing with the fact that this what they call trickle down economics, or as the great George H.W. Bush said, voodoo economics, right?
Yep. There you go. And it's nonsense.
So what specific lessons from the book do you feel are most pertinent for contemporary society, especially for the younger generations grappling with their own social and political changes like right now?
The essential fact, and nothing has ever changed, is that you need to think for yourself, that you need to recognize that what is important. What is important is other people, is your family, your community, and the idea, as doctors say, first do no harm. Try to do no harm to the people around you. Try to develop your own abilities and potential contribution to the greater society to a maximum level. And develop your BS detector so that, particularly when you get the people who are promising you, when it all sounds too good to be true, the odds are good that it isn't, and steer clear of those folks. But particularly now, get a wide look widely at information, where it comes from. Keep in mind what's the source and how, and is it credible? Is it documented? And so many people are swallowing, stuff on Facebook as gospel, and it's like.
Conspiracy theories du jour.
My natural inclination is anti-conspiracy theory. My life experience has taught me, frankly, that stupidity
reigns supreme.
And certainly explains a lot more than deep, dark conspiracies, which require carefulness and I'm sorry, Pete Hegseth is not smart enough to take part in a conspiracy. He or, and I can list others, but as an example. So anyway.
Yeah, the fact that we live in this time where there is no authority that you can look at, like, say, Walter Cronkite, that, is basically giving you the truth, and you know it because you trust him, right? Who embodies that today? Everybody kind of has their own avatar, who that is. But to your point, it should always just be you. You're the one that should be that person.
It is ultimately you.
Mm-hmm.
No matter if you say, I believe totally in what blank says. It's your responsibility for choosing that source, and hopefully you choose wisely.
Yeah, we really need to bring shame back where, people feel ashamed when proven that what comes out of their mouth is utter bullshit.
Yes.
And to go, oh, my bad, I will learn to be better. But it just seems that everybody just gets
No, they start talking about alternate facts.
Right, or alternate realities,
Yes.
not even facts. I don't even. We're not going to go down that road. So back to the book. The overall tone seems thoughtful and sometimes melancholic, but ultimately vital. Was writing this book an emotional journey for you? And did your own perspective on the era evolve through the process?
That's, again, a good question. I mean, it clearly evolved just because, writing evolves. So,
Yeah.
you put your first draft and then you start editing and finding clumsy sentences and questionable assertions. So, on the whole, yes, it evolved, but it's my theory is that the reason I've spent the last 50 years researching the counterculture is that when it was booming in the 60s in San Francisco, I was in the backwoods of Maine and then in upstate New York, and I missed it all. And I've been trying to catch up ever since. And I'm not a hippie by any means. I'm if anything, I'm sort of a beatnik intellectual on some level.
Yeah.
Because those are the values that I cherish the most, which is rejecting the mainstream and trying to think carefully about it. So
Critical lens.
a critical mentality is very useful in this day and age, particularly when there's so much falsehood floating around.
Yeah. The book invites reflection. What specific areas of personal or societal reflection do you hope The Last Great Dream will inspire in its readers?
If people just recognize that to some extent the impact of the 60s, the hippies, is considerably more powerful than people recognize, that it is part of our culture, not politics, unfortunately.
Yeah, we seem to have won the culture and lost the politics.
That's right. And, it did help. It did help with ending the war.
Yeah.
But other than that, because it was peace-oriented, but other than that, it went into the kitchen and the exercise room, and,
I think it helped fuel LGBTQ, women's movement.
I don't know why I left that out.
Yeah,
but yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No. The whole image of the gentle male hippie, which was the first time. The first time that people advocated for pacifism and gentleness in males.
In men, right.
Wearing, beads and almost cross-dressing in some ways, which would lead to, in 10 years, the gay influx into the Castro and San Francisco in general, the gay capital of the United States or the world at that moment. And now we're tussling with issues of transgender, all of which derive from this. It all starts from the same place, and it's critical. And again, it's about. It just astonishes me why I understand that a large portion of the people in the United States want things simple, black and white. There's men and there's women. But no one who's read when you find a 3-year-old child raised by just a reasonably conventional family saying, no, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, from that day and consistently, how can you possibly object? What effect does it have on you that someone else is not comfortable with the gender assigned at birth? How is it your business to worry about it? Why does the Supreme Court allow Tennessee to ban that on the excuse that they're protecting?
Which I believe happened today.
Yes, it did, and it's awful, and I'm distraught, frankly, about it. It's just appalling.
Well, if I can, my first thought was it Proposition 13? Is that what the
anti-gay?
Yes, yeah. That immediately was flipped within an election cycle or two, and we ended up with marriage equality.
May it be so, or will the Republicans manage to ban marriage equality? Yeah. That's on a bad day. I think about those things, you know.
Yeah. All right, last question. In the if the 1960s offered the last great dream, do you see potential for new great dreams to emerge today? And what might they look like and feel like in comparison?
You know, I once asked Michael McClure, the beat poet, it was one of my first big interviews, and I said, why did On the Road have such an amazing impact? I mean, it really did. People, a whole generation, Janis Joplin and David Bowie and Bob Dylan and Jerry Garcia and all the artists of the 60s read the Beats, virtually without exception, and were influenced by them. And I said, why did it have such a major impact? And he said, Dennis, did you live in the 50s? And I said, well, I was 10 when they ended, so I guess, but not. And he said, look, coming after a depression and a world war and in a radical boom, financial boom, more prosperity.
Yeah.
But the consequence was the Cold War, and it was repression, and it was you got all these goodies, but keep your mouth shut. And you know, McCarthyism, which was much more than Joe McCarthy, had an impact. So now we're in a similar era where literally people, I mean, a person wrote a pro-Palestinian editorial. Freedom of speech, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Obvious.
And they've been arrested.
They arrested her.
And to try to deport her.
We're starting to deport her, and I think we've met.
She's been let out.
Released and all that. But that's, it's like, that's crazy.
So we've returned back to the 1950s.
But even worse, because say what you will about Eisenhower, but the lunacy, the cruelty.
Yeah.
Capturing people, sweeping them off the street, and sending them
without due process,
with no due process, and to a country where they don't even know the language. They were sending people to Sudan.
Just to be cruel.
Just to be cruel.
Just to say, look how cruel we are.
We can, we're doing this because we can.
Yeah.
And that's truly unacceptable. It's just, you can't argue that that's right. No, no matter what you think of the person, it's just, it's nuts. And unfortunately, that's the situation we face.
So are we looking for another Jack Kerouac, another On the Road?
I don't know. We'll know it when we see it. But what we're looking for is, I would like to think, I think it's Thich Nhat Hanh, but one of the major Buddhist commentators said, in Buddhism there's a Maitreya who is the Buddha of the future, and that there will be another Buddha. And the theory by Thich Nhat Hanh was the Maitreya of the future will be a collective, that a Buddha of the whole community gathering together. And I think that's kind of what we have to have now, is a recognition that we need to gather ourselves and support each other and keep the dream alive.
Pick it flat and pick it sound. Don't punish me with brutality. Come on, talk to me. You can see what's going on. Yeah, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. I'll tell you what's going on.
Wow. What an excavation, huh? Let's just take a moment to sift through some of the artifacts we've unearthed here. First, a huge thanks to my friend Dennis McNally for that incredible journey. At the top of the show, I told you that The Last Great Dream was about the why behind the what, And Dennis just gave us a masterclass in exactly that. This wasn't just a trip down memory lane. It was a deep contextual analysis of a cultural earthquake whose aftershocks we are still feeling today. Now, what I find so powerful in our discussion is how Dennis reframes our common understanding. He points out that the famous 1967 Summer of Love wasn't the glorious peak of the dream, but in many ways the beginning of the end. A point of what he called environmental overload, when a beautiful, fragile ecosystem was overwhelmed by its own sudden fame. We said much the same in episode 16, titled East of Eden. And his analysis of the legacy is just staggering. It wasn't just about the music. He drew a direct line from the communitarian experiments of the Diggers to the organic farm-to-table food movement led by people like Alice Waters. He connected the anti-authoritarian, collaborative spirit of the Whole Earth catalog and the homebrew computer club that directly led to the birth of the personal computer. The dream didn't just die in the hate. It went out into the country and planted seeds that are still bearing fruit today. Often, in many ways, we don't even recognize. But Dennis doesn't shy away from the shadows. The book, in our conversation, is both a dazzling celebration and a profound cautionary tale. He argues that so much of our current political division is a direct backlash to the ideals of the 60s, a battle that has never really ended. When he talks about the rise of Ronald Reagan as a direct reaction to hippies and the free speech movement, you realize we're living in the next chapter of the same book. And that brings us to the title, The Last Great Dream. It's poignant because it acknowledges that something was lost, an attempt to build a new world on peace and love that, as he said, was perhaps inherently impossible on a mass scale. But it's also hopeful. Dennis left us with that powerful idea of the next Buddha being a collective, that the way forward isn't about waiting for a new leader or a single unifying voice. It's about us, all of us. It's about building community, thinking critically, developing our BS detectors, and taking on that responsibility ourselves. The dream of the 60s may be over, but the need for a dream is not. The Last Great Dream isn't a eulogy. It's a map. It shows us where we've been and how we got here, and leaves us with the essential, challenging question: what is the dream we will dare to build next? Once again, my guest has been Dennis McNally. The book is The Last Great Dream, the 60s, and the San Francisco Counterculture. Please do yourself a favor and get a copy. It is essential for any archaeologist's library. And a big thank you to all of you for joining us on RNRA Digs Deeper. Remember to visit rockandrolarchaeology.com for everything, show notes, links to our socials, and to check out that sweet new Diggers hoodie at our Fourth Wall shop. And if you feel so inclined, our Patreon is there for you to become an official sponsor of the show. Okay, until next time, I'm your host, Christian Swain. Stay curious and keep up the rockin'.
Rock and Roll Archaeology is written by Richard Evans and Christian Swain. Produced and hosted by Christian Swain. All sound design and incidental music by Jerry Danielson at Busy Signal Studios. Find all of our shows, notes, and links at pantheonpodcast.com. All songs can be found for purchase or streaming wherever you get your great music. Please pick up these amazing tracks. Contact us on social at Pantheon Podcasts on Facebook and Instagram. Tweet us at Pantheon Pods.